Thank you for joining Sports Development Series. We yours truly, Boma Ekiora.
Sports Dev Series is sponsored by Arewa Baobab Fruit Powder, one of the most nutritious substances on the planet. Get your Baobab Fruit Powder from arewabaobab.com.
Sports Dev Series, guys, thank you for joining me. So today, I'm going to talk about the 5 ways to recruit players from Africa. I've run into so many of my colleagues and friends, some people I know who are also agents in Europe, in particular. And then, I want to get players from Africa. I don't know how, it's tough. What's going on? Boma, help me. And I always tell them, listen, go there, develop relationships with the club, have conversations. You can always recruit players out of Africa. Don't be intimidated. Some of them fear, they have stereotypes of corruption. I mean, there is corruption. There's corruption all over the world. Let's be honest, right? So, and I always ask them, don't let that discourage you. There's a lot of talent. They're just unknown, unseen, and they don't have the platform. So always go in and try to get the players. But today we're going to examine, I'll talk about just the top 5 ways, my suggestions, sports dev suggestions, how you could do that, right? Before I do that, let me talk a little bit about my personal journey. Decision I decided to become a FIFA agent, I guess is what you call it now, which is what I was before, was driven by what I had seen through people I knew personally, about African youth that had been exploited by fabricated agents. I had heard stories and witnessed young African players, their parents had been approached by local intermediaries that worked closely with some person out of Europe who promised them the world and riches. And, in some cases, they even got the player to pay the local person. A local person got the player to pay him money so this European agent could get them a job. If you could believe it, it happens. It happens. And then, and long story short, this person takes them to Europe. Maybe they go to a club. Who knows whether or not the opportunity is even real? It might just be an opportunity where it's like, hey, listen, I'm bringing this player and just have him train with you. And when you're finished, send him away. Right? And people that do that. And then this little player is stranded, no money to go back home, even if he wanted to, in whatever country, right? Doesn't even have a place to stay and is undocumented. And it's a scary thing because you're young, anything can happen. In some cases, they don't even speak the language. They're just in a foreign place. There have been cases where the little money they had, they got robbed. It's just a terrible situation. So anyways, long story short, I decided to become an agent seeing these things. So it wasn't necessarily driven by, oh my God, some agents make agent fees, $2.5 million. So that one, don't get me wrong, that's not bad money, right? But that wasn't the driving factor. Until today, it's not. It's not the driving factor, And so what I try to do is I try to make sure that I am working hard, trying to make things happen the right way. And I'm trying to actually get things done. Yeah, so it's an interesting reason, but I wanted to share the reason why I got into business. And over the years, I've had to learn important lessons about recruiting players, African players, even though I'm from there, grew up there. But I think I get a lot of people that ask me questions about this. So here are 5 quick tips for acquiring talent out of the African continent. Number 1, be honest and stand your ground. That means, deal with people the way you would deal with people, from a point of honesty, not coming in trying to bribe your way through because you think certain people don't have enough money, so money could get you whatever you want. Just put money in different people's pockets. While you may be able to do that, the downside to it is that you run into a situation where that's who you become. You become this person that is the money guy. Whether or not they can deliver, totally out of the question. You become a money guy. You become an ATM. And so if you do want to be looked at as an ATM, yeah, run around throwing money all over the place. And if you don't get robbed, then, you know, you may not even end up with players. You want to build real relationships with people that can deliver, because they are down there. People that can deliver, that are honest, that work hard. So I think those are the people that you need to build real relationships with, and find the real talent through that. And don't try to pay for everything. There are cases where, you run into officials that will ask you for money. You run into situations where you have a player signed and you have an opportunity, and the player's international transfer certificate will be asked for before the player travels out of the country, which is against FIFA law. But that happens. There have been examples of coaches asking agents for money to have their players placed on national teams, right? Remember this: if you do pay that money, even if you get what you want, you're starting a trend that will never go away. And that becomes a trend that hurts everything you're trying to get. The best players don't rise to the top because people are paying for substandard players to be on youth national teams. So be honest, stand your ground. Don't let people coax you into paying money for everything. Number 2, manager in quotation mark, beware. So the first time I wanted to sign a 17-year-old player, some guy shows up and is like, yo, I'm his manager. I'm like, what does that mean? He said, well, every time he finishes training, I feed him, I give him some money. I'm like, okay, so you're his friend. He's like, no, I'm his manager. I'm like, is that an agreement that you could show me that shows you are officially his manager? He's like, no. So I asked this guy, I'm like, so what do you want me to do? Well, you should deal with me and not him. At which point, I just looked at him. I didn't say a word. I knew it was total nonsense. And I approached the player's parents, and I was able to get that deal done. Now, the problem is some people who deal with that individual, and they're not real managers. As I mentioned, these are these local entities or people who try to extract money from the player, or an agent that shows an interest in the player, and they're not real brokers or people you should deal with. So it's a hustle by some unscrupulous individuals. And so in going through this process, beware of these so-called managers. Always deal with the family of the player. You want to meet the family. You want to build a relationship with them. The same thing you would do in Europe or North America. Okay. Number 3, player team affiliation. This might seem simple, but it really isn't. Sometimes you have situations where players play for one club and they grow up their home academy or where they grew up. And one thing leads to another. They might play for another club or another club. In some cases, they may even have a professional contract signed, and you may not know. No one may know. And you get this player. You may do all the work, and when it comes to having the player sign a major deal, you find out on the back end that player is already under contract with another club. So what you want to do is work closely with the FA, work closely with the local club, try to find out whether or not there are any agreements. Most FAs will have a register of all their players that are signed with their professional teams. You can verify and go into that and pull up that information. And you understand whether or not this player is signed with a professional club. You can also have the player sign language in there that says that they promise they're not affiliated with any other club and they have not signed an agreement with any other club outside of the club you're currently dealing with, whether it's amateur or pro. So that's also an important thing. Again, as I mentioned as the previous tip, talk to the family, build a relationship. You get more answers than you think you will on the background of this particular player. All right. Next one, expense coverage. Be prepared. Recently, I was talking to some friends of mine who are taking their 15-year-old to a tournament in Spain. They live in the United States. And I thought that was cool. And I think what's happening at that club is all the parents are pulling money together and they're able to fund this trip for their kids, and they're going as well. And it's going to be a blast. They get to experience Spain, play some soccer. It's going to be fun. And I thought, wow, that's super cool. The communities I deal with in Africa, and the players I deal with don't have that ability or that luxury. The players can't pull, and the parents can't pull money together to have their kids travel, right? If they do travel, it's funded by either the owner of the club or the local government, not the parents. Okay, pulling money together for a whole team to travel. And it's a great opportunity. I mean, you could get scouted easily if you're able to go to these tournaments. You get to compete against the best, which lifts the level of the club. So it's a really good opportunity, but it's something that they don't have access to. And just to further explain expense coverage, I've had players I've had to get soccer shoes for. I've had players I've had to get meals for. I've had players that, their local clubs haven't paid them in weeks. And, I've had to help them cover that expense as well. So it's something to be aware of. You're dealing with players from a different economic background. And there are things that we that live in the West may say, oh, this is normal, everyone should have access to this, that they may not have. So don't be, surprised if questions are asked about certain expenses that you think should not be the case. And if a player is really good and is coming from an impoverished background, just be prepared. And also there is the business element. You have to make a business decision too for what's best for you. But it's a case where it's not uncommon, and it's something that anyone trying to get players may have to deal with. Next one, agreements are necessary. So usually this goes without saying, but trust me, it's very important in trying to get players from African countries. You want to make sure that all agreements that the player has entered into, you're able to get access to them, verify them. And even if it's not mentioned, you want to check. All right. Has the player signed a professional contract? They say no. Verify anyways whether or not the player is registered with any team, has been registered with the league. The good news is, with the new registration process they have for players affiliated with academies, you can verify that stuff. And in verifying it, it gives you the ability to be able to see whether or not a player or an academy is registered with the federation, which is responsible for all of football, soccer operations in the country. And so there's a way to actually go and verify some stuff. So I think it's important that as you get agreements done, you want to make sure that there are no other outstanding agreements that a particular player has been entered into. Also, you want to make sure that in your agreement, you have the player sign off so there aren't any liabilities against you for getting a player that maybe the player signed another agreement with an agent and is not truthful about it. That will protect you in that situation. Or maybe the player signed with another academy and the academy is not willing to release him. Who knows what the deal is? So you want to make sure going in that regardless of what people say, you want written language that protects you in that situation. Okay, and I think that wraps it up. Yeah, those are the 5 tips. I think it's also important to mention that while people might look at it and say, okay, if it's this much of a headache, why do I want to get players out of this continent? Well, here's the thing. Let's take UNESCO's statistics, for example. Sub-Saharan African countries have the youngest population proportion in the world, with over 70% of the region's population aged below 30. The young, vibrant population. The African countries also have the fastest growing population in the world. So when you combine those two, the weather is warm year round, right? The bowl or the mixing pot is filled with the right tools for there to be the proportion of players. And this may not just apply to soccer. It could be basketball. It could be American football, right? I do have some ideas about that. But it's the right mix and environment for athletic talent. And so if you want to go in there and get players from this place, it's a good idea to understand the dynamics of what you're going in to get players for, right? If you look at Europe, Bundesliga, EPL, La Liga, you see a good number of players from the African continent. And if they're not directly from the African continent, they're first or second generation African playing in Europe, in some cases for a lot of national teams. So it's something that I think if you're a serious recruiter or scout, you can't ignore. You can ignore it all you want. It's just a matter of time, right? Fastest growing population, 70% of regions below age of 30. It's just a matter of time. You will be dealing with talent from there. And as African countries become more and more developed, the aspect of sports development will get better. And if that get better, you're going to be down there trying to get talent. So it's good to have tips. If you listen to my tips, I think you'll be fine. And while you're doing that, subscribe to my channel. Okay. But seriously, I think the developed world takes things for granted that the developing world may not have. But in figuring out what those things are, I believe recruiting football talent in Africa is fun. It's a fulfilling experience, and it can significantly benefit any club or any agent. Okay. Thanks, guys, for joining me, and it's been a blast. If you haven't, subscribe and follow us for more. Take care.